mostly go with a pack of friends?
I felt both safe and unsafe. I was a lot on my own, but I also knew that there were a lot of stated and unstated dangers, and especially in the evenings, it was not always safe to walk alone.
How would you describe primary school in Poland? Did you feel supported by your teachers, and did you have a lot of time to play with others, or was it pretty strict?
There was plenty of time to play with my peers, and we had a tight knit group of about 4 or 5 of us. Um, we played together, we walked home together, and where we used to split going in different directions, we would linger on the corner and chat very often. Teachers, as usual, there were some who stood out and pushed us in a very creative way, and some who were indifferent. But overall, I was lucky to be in a good school.
Do you feel that your mom and dad cared about your education? And if not, were there any like major figures that were critical in shaping your growth slash interest in school?
My father was always very strong about studying and education. From the very early days, it was always a matter of pushing to get good grades to go to university. That was never a question. My mother did not care, but my father was such a strong influence that it overrode others.
Do you remember any moments that stand out from your teenage years, especially like that percolate?
Probably when I left Poland and moved to Canada, because I left 2/3 through high school, and that was difficult and traumatic. I did not speak enough English to be functional. I left friends behind, I left everything familiar, moved to a country where I didn't know anybody and did not have support network, nor did I speak the language to make new connections easily.
Okay. Did you feel like back in Poland you had access to basic necessities and you were pretty close in terms of socioeconomic status to those around you? Was there like ever a time you felt that you didn't have access to basic resources?
Um, in Poland at that time, the socioeconomic divide was less pronounced. So most of us had little, but we, for the most part, we did not lack, excuse me, basics. We had good education, good shelter, uh, good health care, sort of.
Okay.
But there were times when food rations were instituted by the government, and the queues to get basics were long. So it was not unusual to queue up for 2, 3 hours to get what we would consider basics of milk not, but things like butter, meats, things that we need to live on.
Um, were you do you were you more of an introvert or an extrovert? Do you think your comfort levels with others changed in terms of that?
I was very much an introvert. I always had some friends, but not many. So I had 2, 3 friends, but a lot of it was a very specific bonding. People bond for different reasons, and for us, it was bonding through our wounds. But we stuck together because we came from dysfunctional families, and we supported each other through the trouble at home, and that really sustained us.
So I know that your parents were, yeah, as you've told me, kind of angry and could be violent and abusive. But were there times where you felt like that it was peaceful and you could talk to them, or were your friends your only outlet?
No, it's my family was at its worst when both parents were together. But thankfully, there were long periods of time when one was gone, whether one of them was traveling abroad for months at a time or living in another city, working there, and coming for brief visits home. That was easier because I got along better with my father than with my mother. But generally speaking, when they were separated, it was a lot more peaceful at home.
Um, okay. Were you ever a troublemaker in this group? Like, did you get questioned by the police or, like, caught at all?
No, I did not get questioned by the police, but my teachers at every parent conference in primary schools specifically always complained that I talk too much in class.
How easy was it for you to relate to, like, other teens? Did you find it difficult to communicate with others, especially when you moved?
When I moved, it was very difficult because there was not enough language to form meaningful relationships. And I had briefly a friend in high school, but then we got separated when we went to university. And during university, I formed friendships, but they did not last. And but university years were much easier
Did people treat you well as an immigrant?
for the most part. Yeah.
Do you think that you had a political voice in Canada, like you had the freedom of political expression? Did you
Mm.
ever choose to use it?
Yeah, yeah. When I was at university, I joined Conservative Party of Canada.
Um, in terms of international exposure, what what was the hardest thing to overcome?
In what sense?
Well, when you moved to Canada and you assimilated as an immigrant, what was the most
Actually,
difficult?
everything was difficult because uh, the activities of daily living had a different rhythm. Food had different taste. Uh, there were different customs, but the most difficult one was uh, we interact socially through rules that are uh, uh, we are trained in those rules from a very young age. And when you jump in as a teenager or young adult, you don't often understand the rules of the game. Things you say, things you don't say, or things you say and they mean something else. So that's a very important missing component, and it took me a long time to understand and learn those because no one really teaches you willingly uh, those types of rules. So you end up very often uh, unwittingly, un- without really having any bad intentions, committing a lot of social faux pas.
So I know that you you've explained to me in the past that you have changed a lot from who you were. And I'd like to ask, how were you able to overcome the obstacles that you face with education and debt in terms of where you were and what catalyzed your transition as a person? Was there any defining moment?
So we're talking about emotional changes.
Yes.
I think the one foremost thing was recognition that the change was necessary and the willingness to go forward with it. Because at first it is a little bit overwhelming and frightening. So having that willingness to take this step in a different direction is one of the most important things.
Jumping around a little bit, uh, when my dad left for England, what made you realize that you missed him?
I don't know. There was this sudden realization that, oh no, he's going and I'll miss him. It came out of nowhere and there was no clear explanation why and how. It was sudden and it was there.
Did he give you a lot of support in when you were going through like dental school and
That's,
struggling with?
yeah. At that point, we were together, living together, and he was very supportive, and we shared a lot. We always had a very uh, open relationship, open in the sense that we communicated very clearly to the extent that was a possible, and he often offered whatever support he could. Yeah.
How do you think having me changed your perspective on the world? Slash, what did you learn from raising a child?
Oh, that would be a subject of a separate interview. Like, parenthood is an incredible learning experience that people talk about, and it's a cliche until you start living it and you realize how much you learn through the eyes of the child. And then as the child becomes older, you still keep learning until the child is a young adult and they start discovering the world and you discover it with them.
What are some of your guiding principles when interacting with others, and slash, how do you how do you try to carry yourself when you interact with other people, and do you have any role models that help shape that?
I had many, but at this point it's more a blend. I think my overriding factor is that I try to be polite and, excuse me, accommodating, but at the same time, um, I'm I have my boundaries clearly established, and they are not going to change without my permission. And I'm through very polite body language and our verbal rules. That's on the table at all times.
Do you feel like there there were specific people that helped you achieve these ideals slash moral aspirations?
I suppose I could start listing, but the thing is, when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I was so deeply unhappy with myself, with the way my social life was not going, with the way I was acting, that I started reading a lot. And so my first teachers were really books, and there were lots of them, and it just evolved from there.
This is kind of a broad question, but do you feel like you've achieved most of your career and life goals, especially because you're a single woman, or excuse me, you are a independent business owner, and you are a woman in a male-dominated field?
Um, Growing up in Poland, I was often reminded that women are supposed to or not supposed to do certain things. But in the States, it's less of an issue. It's not that it's not happening, but it is less of an issue. And what is very helpful and liberating is, as we as people get older, coming into middle age is also in many cases equivalent uh, with coming into one's own. So certain rules get rewritten. It's just because someone tells you that all women or men are not supposed to do it doesn't mean that has to be the case. It says who says the supposed.